What is Popper critical theory? That's what we'll try to find out in this video. We'll first define critical rationalism and then explain how it leads to a particular understanding of knowledge, justification, rationality, truth, and finally to the idea of a theory being critical. Let's start with critical rationalism. Critical rationalism is an epistemological philosophy that was advanced by Karl Popper. It's based on the idea that statements can't simply be justified because they are true. Rather, they must be justified because they are falsifiable. In other words, if you want to justify your belief in a statement, it's not enough to show that it's true. You also need to show that it could potentially be false. This is known as the principle of falsifiability, or Popper's first criterion of demarcation. Falsifiability is a necessary condition for a statement to count as scientific. But this isn't the only thing Popper had to say about justification and rationality. He also argued that for a statement to be justifiable, it needs to be testable. And this means that it has to make non-trivial predictions about what will happen in the world. In order for a statement to be considered scientific, it must be falsifiable and verifiable. Now, while these principles were initially introduced by Popper in his early work, he later on shifted his position. In his later work, he said that verifiability isn't actually needed in order for something to count as science. However, falsifiability remains a central aspect of critical rationalism. Popper's critical rationalism has often been confused with logical positivism, but there are significant differences between them. While both views share an emphasis on verification and falsification, they differ significantly in their understanding of these concepts and their overall approach to knowledge. Logical positivism adopts a stricter verificationist approach, requiring direct empirical verification for meaningful statements. Popper, on the other hand, takes a broader approach through his concept of falsifiability. One of the key distinctions lies in their stance on unobservable entities like atoms and theoretical constructs. Logical positivists generally consider such entities as meaningless since they cannot be directly observed. Popper, however, argues that unobservable entities can be part of a meaningful and scientific theory as long as they are falsifiable. For instance, while logical positivists might reject the concept of an atom as meaningless because it cannot be directly verified, Popper would argue that it's meaningful because it makes testable and falsifiable predictions about the behavior of matter. In essence, logical positivism emphasizes direct correspondence with experience as the basis for meaning and scientific status. Popper's critical rationalism broadens the scope by incorporating falsification as a key element in assessing the meaningfulness and scientific value of statements. This distinction highlights the different perspectives on the role of observation, inference, and the broader aim of advancing scientific knowledge in our understanding of the world. So we see that critical rationalism is based on the idea that the way to distinguish between true and false statements is by looking at whether they can be falsified. But this raises the question of what it means for a statement to be falsified. In order to answer that question, let's turn to the next part of the video where we look at Popper's falsifiability principle. Now let's talk about Popper's falsifiability principle. The falsifiability principle is a central concept in critical rationalism developed by Karl Popper. It serves as the primary criterion for distinguishing scientific from non-scientific statements and theories. According to this principle, a statement or a theory is considered scientific if and only if it's possible to conceive of an observation or a set of observations that would refute it. In other words, a statement must be falsifiable. Popper argued that this principle is essential for the advancement of human knowledge, because it provides a clear way to distinguish between competing theories and to decide which one best fits the available evidence. For example, let's consider the statement, "All swans are white." This statement is clearly falsifiable. If one were to observe a black swan, this observation would immediately refute the statement. Similarly, the theory of gravity proposed by Isaac Newton is also falsifiable. According to Newton's laws, there should be a limit to the speed of falling objects. If an object were to be observed falling faster than this limit, it would falsify Newtonian gravity. On the other hand, consider the statement, "All bachelors are married." This statement is not falsifiable. No matter what evidence one might observe, it's impossible to refute the statement. This is because the statement is either true or false, depending on how we define marriage. Therefore, it doesn't make any empirical difference whether or not bachelors exist. In fact, if someone claims that all bachelors are married, it's very likely that they haven't defined their terms carefully, and this renders the statement meaningless. This is why Popper argued that the falsifiability principle is a useful tool for philosophers and scientists. By using this principle, they can avoid getting sidetracked by making claims that are not falsifiable, and focus instead on those that can be tested and potentially disproven. This approach allows for a more efficient and rigorous pursuit of knowledge. It's important to note that the falsifiability principle has been subject to various interpretations and criticisms. Some argue that the principle is too restrictive and excludes certain areas of knowledge, such as sociology and economics. Others contend that the notion of falsifiability is vague and requires further clarification. Despite these criticisms, the falsifiability principle remains a cornerstone of critical rationalism and continues to influence the philosophy of science. We now arrive at the most important point of the video, the relationship between the falsifiability principle and the idea of a critical theory. Now let's discuss the relationship between the falsifiability principle and the idea of a critical theory. The link between these two concepts lies in Popper's view of how knowledge progresses. Popper argued that the primary goal of science is to explain and predict phenomena in the natural world. To achieve this, scientists develop theories that serve as models of reality. These theories are based on empirical observations and are intended to provide a deeper understanding of the underlying mechanisms driving the phenomena. However, Popper recognized that these theories are not directly verifiable. Rather, they are approximations of reality that are constantly being refined and adjusted based on new evidence and observations. This is where the falsifiability principle comes into play. Popper argued that a good scientific theory is one that is falsifiable, meaning that it can be potentially disproven through observation or experimentation. A theory that is not falsifiable is, in Popper's view, unscientific because it cannot be tested and therefore does not provide any genuine explanation or prediction of natural phenomena. Now, the term critical in critical theory refers to this process of testing and refining theories. A critical theory is one that is capable of being critically examined and improved upon. This process of critical examination involves a combination of intuition, creativity, and logical deduction. Scientists use their intuition and creativity to develop a theory that fits the available evidence, and then use logic to deduce the consequences of the theory and make predictions about what should be observed if the theory is correct. The predictions are then tested through observation or experimentation. If the theory is supported by the evidence, it is retained and further developed. But if it is refuted, it must be abandoned or modified. This process of critical examination is an essential part of the scientific method and is what distinguishes science from other forms of knowledge. Therefore, a critical theory is one that can withstand this process of critical examination and emerge stronger and more refined. In essence, the relationship between the falsifiability principle and the idea of a critical theory is that a theory is considered critical if it meets the standards set by the falsifiability principle, that is, it can be tested and potentially disproven. This characteristic allows for the continuous improvement and advancement of our knowledge and understanding of the world around us. I hope this has been a helpful and clear introduction to Popper's critical theory. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.